Hello and welcome back to Season 5 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR, where this year we've been on a mission to uncover the connections between data, decision making, and how to navigate a fast moving business landscape. Today's episode, the last in our season, is set to be a bit different to normal. And that's because after 5 years of hosting the MRX Lab, this one is my last. My guest today is Mike Connor from FlexMR, who will be hosting the show starting from season 6 from 2025 onwards. So instead of diving into our usual conversation about what's happening in the research and insight industry today, or interesting adjacent fields we can learn from, instead we'll be finding out a bit more about Mike and his vision for the show as it continues into the future. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Oh, by the end of the show, to be thank you for having me.
Well, that's true.
First things first. First things first. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your background and your kind of journey in market research so far.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So currently, I'm a sales development rep at FlexMR. So my main responsibility in the business is generating interest in our services and platform Insight Hub. And I'm really marked on just bringing new businesses as clients. But my background really academically has served me really well into the transition into market research. I studied an undergraduate degree in psychology, where it gave me a real grasp on the research methods with both quant and qual. And then I chose to do a master's at Lancaster in marketing. And really within my dissertation project in my master's, where I conducted a market research project for an external client, really gave me a good grasp on the industry and gave me a real interest in it. I stumbled upon FlexMR when I was looking for a job in my master's. And at the time, I was doing a lot of surveys through a different supplier. And I remember looking at Insight Hub and thinking, oh my God, I wish I had access to all this when I was doing my project. And I just thought it was really interesting. So I just put a quick application in, and here I am 15 months later talking to you.
And how have those first 15 months been? What have you kind of learned in that year and a bit?
I mean, sales is always a game of rejection. I think the main thing for me is just being okay with that now. It's been a steep learning curve into that world of just doing what works, trying to figure out what works, speaking to new people. Obviously, within the industry itself, it's been getting a grasp on the main challenges that are facing researchers on a day-to-day basis, but also the bigger things that people are talking about, such as like AI and stuff like that.
I think there's an interesting angle which a lot of marketers don't think about, especially B2B. You know, the 95-5 rule.
Yeah.
95% of your target audience aren't ready to buy right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In marketing, we talk about that statistic a lot, but in sales, that's kind of a lived reality. You're finding out every day those 95% aren't ready to buy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think an interesting point on that is just letting go of thinking about everything that has to become a deal. So, for example, like you said, only 5% are going to be ready for you in that moment when you do that initial outreach. They're ready to go. They want to bring that in. They know what they want. The rest of the people that I speak to are the people that may not even know that we exist, may not know the things that we do exist, like setting up communities and panels, and have never considered that for the business. So when I come in, a lot of it can be talking to them on a general level about the things that we do, the things that we've done for our existing clients and past clients that brought value into the company and the insight team. But on a personal level, just understanding that not everything has to turn into a sale straight away, being okay with just having those general conversations, and 12 months down the line, that may sprout into a deal or it may not. And just, I think when you first start in sales, a lot of people want everything to go their way straight away, and it puts a lot of pressure on you. when you're doing discovery calls, that you're trying to qualify someone and make sure that they're going to be okay to buy from you and get them onto the next stage, get them onto the demo. But for me, when you get into your groove, you actually try and disqualify people. That's when you do the best discovery. It's like, can you actually buy from me? You're trying to put those blockers in place so you're not wasting your time with people that really you can't solve the problems that they're facing.
I think there's a similar kind of complement between sales and marketing. We often see that as a divide
Mm,
between functions. But really, in marketing, you're kind of trained in, you'll know this from your masters. You're trained to, through research, live in the shoes of your customers, put that customer at the center of your thinking and decision making. And there's that wisdom of once you step across the desk as well, no matter if you are a researcher or, you know, you're buying a snack, you're no longer the customer of that brand because you're
yeah,
thinking a different frame of mind.
yeah,
And I think that's really crucial in sales as well, to understand that almost it's almost humility in the sense of not being company centric or sales centric or product centric. It's about being customer centric and
yeah.
learning those different perspectives and just finding out where the right fits are.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good point because there's always seems to be like this divide between sales and marketing, but ultimately you are trying to achieve a very similar thing. And it's just a different way of going about it, really. And I think you're right in terms of the customer centricity viewpoint with sales as well as marketing. I always see things on LinkedIn of people basically outing poor salesmen for the generic approach that you could have written in ChatGPT and sent them an email, and it could literally be for anyone. And it actually comes across as rude, I think, that you're wasting someone's time, not doing any research on the company, not even understanding them as a professional, what challenges they're facing, just doing your due diligence of, even if it's a researcher in the financial services industry, as long as you know a bit about researchers in general, you can become so much more personable that way, even excluding the problems they're facing, like consumer duty testing, those sorts of things. You didn't even have to know anything about that, but people just send them these blank email templates that I don't even know how they work. I think it is more just like numbers game over quality. So yeah.
Yeah. And we also ascribe a lot of that to the people, where
Yeah,
in reality it's a real systemization of the sales system where
absolutely.
the people are blamed, but in reality there is a company, there is a directive behind that, which is influencing that direction. But yeah, I do agree um, on how much that personality and that effort and that sincere interest in your customers really matters and makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears slightly. Talk about the podcast.
Brilliant.
2025, your first season. What kind of topics do you hope to cover, and what kind of guests are you hoping to bring on?
Yeah, so in a similar way to you, I'll be aiming to talk to end client researchers at different brands, trying to get across different industries. I'd be interested in speaking to researchers that are at the forefront of using AI and new technology to conduct better, more efficient research. Anyone who's using community or panels to get close to the customers that really influences their research and business decisions. Um, and just the people that are bringing value in with insight to the business, thinking of that more strategic level, speaking to those strategic leaders within research and marketing to cover how they're navigating this economic landscape at the moment, some of the best practices their team are using to save money, but also staying at the forefront of trends emerging within the industry. And another avenue, which I guess will be secondary, but I think will be really interesting to cover, is speaking to people who've had an unconventional journey into research. I know every time you ask someone how they've ended up in their industry, they always say, I kind of fell into it. Um, I want to speak to people who've had maybe a few different roles within a company first and then fallen into the research side. I always think those people come at research with a very different viewpoint and bring in some different thinking to research, which would be really interesting to cover.
Well, I'm glad to hear, as the successor, as our next host, that similarly you're really interested in speaking to people who are doing interesting things, and not just people who are out there promoting interesting things. We have a lot of great thought leaders, thinkers in the research industry. But I think one of the benefits of this podcast, one of the things that brings value to our listeners, or has to date, has been bringing new voices, unheard voices, to the forefront, and giving different people a chance to have that microphone. So,
Absolutely.
Really glad to hear that. And thinking a bit further ahead, what's your vision for the future of the MRX Lab?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've put some thought into that. My first reaction is that I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, and you've done a brilliant job with building the podcast and the direction it's gone in. I think back to when I was choosing to study marketing from my psychology degree. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about marketing or market research. And I always thought, oh, it's more of a creative degree. You know, you think of social media, etc., all that sort of stuff when marketing pops into your head. And I know that when I actually did the masters, that it was actually really data heavy. A lot of it came down to market research. A lot of it was all these big decisions that were being made were underpinned with it. So therefore, I'd really like to make it more accessible to the wider marketing field. Anyone that has an interest within marketing, I think, should understand the importance of market research. And although it isn't the most glamorous field in marketing, like I said, when people think of marketing, they think of great advertisements and then social media, influencer marketing. It doesn't mean it's any less important. And I think we sometimes keep ourselves as researchers in a bubble with the jargon that we use, and we make it less accessible for those people that it actually influences. And it also makes it really hard for people to understand the value you bring when you keep yourself in that bubble. You know, you'll talk to researchers, and don't get me wrong, they do some really interesting things and they get really passionate about the projects that they're conducting. But if you're not a researcher, sometimes it can be difficult to understand what they've done, especially influencing the wider marketing decisions within the business. So yeah, the underlying vision for me is to make it more accessible, that if you were maybe studying marketing or you're in a marketing field outside of market research, you could listen to it and be like, oh, that was really interesting. They brought a lot of value in, and I can see how they've influenced decisions.
There's some really great CMO survey research, which you might have seen, about the majority of marketers not knowing how to capitalize or act on insight. So I think that idea of improving accessibility, breaking down the barriers between researchers and marketing,
Yes.
and bringing it to a wider audience is a fantastic idea. So this must be quite an exciting time for you, as you're kind of looking at planning out your first season. What are you most looking forward to?
Simply put, I think having more conversations with people is what's drawing it to me most. I try to approach everything in the job as a learning experience. And the more conversations I have, the more I learn, and I'm able to have those better conversations. Like we mentioned before, being more personable to people. So, for example, if I know XYZ is having a certain problem in an industry and this is how they've solved it, this project helped them influence that decision, overcoming problems. It means that when I have conversations with other people having that problem or other people in the industry, it allows me to have a more informed conversation with that person. And finally, just owning something, regardless of the vision that the podcast takes. I just want to make it more successful, get more listeners and more people engaged with the field. I think if by the end of the 12 months after the next season has finished, if I've just added a few more engaged listeners and got a few more people engaged within the field of market research, I could consider that a great success.
So I'm wondering also about how you see the podcast evolving over the next 12 months and beyond. I think we'll get beyond 12 months too. How you see it evolving alongside kind of the current and future research landscape. So on that point, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges you see facing the research sector right now?
I think it's a really great question, and it is worth thinking about, because I think people in different roles within the sector would have maybe different answers. But for me, as a salesperson at heart, really, I think a lot of teams are struggling with the economic landscape within market research at the minute. Obviously, we've seen a lot of budgets being cut or at least frozen, especially since I've been in the role. They're seeing less money invested in their work and the capability to do their work. And some probably just feel like order takers, like they're being used to back up decisions that have already been made, rather than their research being influencing decision making like it should be. So I think there's a lot of optimism within the market research industry in terms of like a lot of tools coming out, AI obviously at the forefront of that. But I think teams are probably sat there seeing all these advancements and getting excited for what it means for them and the research they conduct. But on the other side, have that sinking feeling that it's actually going to take a lot of convincing on their side to even consider bringing that in for the wider business. And I think that's the most common thing that I see in a sales perspective is you win over the research team who really want the product, they really want the services, they see the value that it's going to bring into the business, they see the investment and the return that's going to come from that. But then it's this second uphill battle that they then have to go and convince, the higher ups that this is actually going to bring them value in the long run and make those decisions more informed. And I think that's the overriding point, is that the industry as a whole is seen maybe as a cost at the moment rather than an investment. And it's actually changing that perspective. I've seen it as an investment, bringing more money into it so that they can make better decisions and ultimately make more money. Other than that, there's other things like data quality issues. But for me, I think, and we'll probably talk about it later, is that there are advancements in technology and AI that are coming in and helping with those problems. So I think that on the flip side, there is a lot to be optimistic about.
So let's talk about that optimism then. On a similar note, what are the opportunities? What do you see as the real strengths that the research sector should be pushing right now?
Yeah, and following on from that, the advancements in technology and AI are really mind blowing. Even just in the 12 months that I've been here, obviously we as a company are embracing AI in our product, and just seeing some of the developments in that has been really amazing. I think back to when I was sort of conducting research at an academic level and doing qual during psychology or marketing, and just thinking about the coming up with themes, analyzing long transcripts of data from interviews, taking multiple evenings to do that. And now there's tools out there that you just pop the transcript in and it'll come up with a couple of themes just like that. It's the amount of time that it's saving you. And I think, going back to when I first started, I feel like the sentiment around AI was, there was a bit more of a negative feel about it. It was like, oh my God, is this going to take our jobs? Is it going to completely replace the market researchers? And I'm sure when it was coming out years before that sentiment was similar. But I think over the last 12 months, there's been more of an optimistic feel about AI and the technology, that it's actually going to turn into more of a, like Excel, it helps the way we work rather than completely replacing it. It makes it more efficient. And I also think, if the market changes around and the viewpoint changes about what value market research brings in, I think it'll be really exciting. Every time I go and support the team at conferences, there's always new companies that are starting up with a new product or something new within the AI space. And you just think, with more money that comes into the industry, how amazing some of those companies are going to turn out, and the more interesting products that are going to come out as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. It just takes a few small changes and keeping that optimism going.
Cool. Really good to hear that you're positive about the future of research, and that despite the fact that there are some kind of macro environment issues right now, that there's a lot of teams kind of feeling the strain, that there are bright spots and opportunities and kind of things to be hopeful for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, final question, closing question from me. Completely unrelated to everything else we've talked about. Do you listen to podcasts outside of this one, of course?
Yeah. I think podcasts have really become a mainstay for a lot of people, especially sort of younger generations, and how they get their information. I remember, I think the first podcast that I came across when I was younger on YouTube was probably Joe Rogan. He's probably the biggest podcaster out there in any sort of space. He'd do things about conspiracy theories and all that sort of stuff, which was, as a teenager, was really interesting. Some of the ones that I listen to now are The Rest Is Politics, which is how I get some of my current affairs from some politicians, and The Athletic, which cover football news because I'm a massive football fan. So yeah, I'm quite big on my podcasts.
Great. Good to hear. So I think this is a good point in the episode to make the transition official. After 5 years, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who's listened to and watched this show grow. All the way from our short 10-minute segments on research adjacent practices to the platform it is now for lifting up new emerging voices in the sector. Mike, from today onwards, you're the host. The future of the show is in your hands. So I guess before I leave, is there anything you'd like to ask me?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a few questions I think would be really interesting for me and also the listeners to know. So first of all, what prompted you to start MRX Lab? And has it turned out how you hoped 5 years down the line?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as kind of long-time listeners will know, the show today is very different to what it started out as. When we started, the idea was that there were a lot of very long-winded, ironically, now we do 20 or 30-minute episodes, but there were a lot of very long-winded podcasts. And as a working professional, my life wasn't, I didn't have enough time to listen to a work-related podcast during work or after work. So I kind of looked and thought, maybe what if we just try to do something really digestible, bring people new, interesting ideas in 10 minutes and put that hard time limit on it, so that we're really forcing ourselves to be concise and to think about the value of every episode, not just what we'd like to talk about. And that was where the idea came from. And I was very fortunate at the time that I had a supportive team who said, yeah, sure, try it. So we did. And we ran in that format for about 3 years until we started to realize we were running out of topics to talk about. I needed to bring on guests. But for guests, 10 minutes is a really challenging time limit, because by the time you've done introductions and by the time you've done a short kind of closing summary, there's very little time to actually discuss and get down into the details of a topic. So when we switched to a guest format, we also lengthened the episodes. But part of the reason for switching to that guest format was because we'd covered so many of these research adjacent topics. And I think there was still a huge amount of value left untapped. But instead of being topic led, when we made that switch and we kind of continued to think about value, what we really wanted to do was use the platform we built to give practitioners a voice, not thought leaders who are already
Yeah.
on podcasts or have other avenues to express their views, but real day-to-day practitioners who
Yeah.
don't often get the opportunity to voice their opinions and share the work that they're doing. And
Yeah.
that's where we are today. And I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty happy with how it's gone.
Brilliant. I mean, and just my last question. Obviously, you've been in the industry for quite a while now, and obviously, I've been in it 12 months. So, asking me the challenges and optimisms, I can only refer back to the last 12 months. But for you, what's the biggest thing that's changed within the industry since you entered it?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think for all the talk of innovation, the real pace of systemic change is quite slow.
Yeah.
New technology changes the way we do things, but it hasn't changed the core function of what market research is or how it's used, or even the challenges that you referenced today around the value of research, kind of as you move it up the corporate ladder, getting
Yep.
a seat at the table, a seat at many
Yep.
tables around the business. That has been a perennial problem for 20, 30 years, probably longer. And despite all of these new innovations, despite new technology, despite the fact that we went from paper clipboard surveys to web surveys to AI assisted surveys, nothing has yet resolved that value gap. So when I think about the challenge, the real one, it's about shifting the dial on organizational culture and making sure that research and data and deep insight isn't just something that is useful once every now and again or during a project, but is a key touchstone of how people make decisions.
Yep.
And that's not a change that comes through just practice. That's a change that comes through influencing the worldviews and the things that we place value on.
Absolutely.
That's where I think our attention should be, and where there's both huge challenge today and opportunity to make businesses more effective, more aligned with customers, better serving the people that they want to be serving. And research sits at the center of that,
Absolutely.
no matter how you cut it. So, yeah, I know you asked me what's changed, and my answer really is not much. I think what's changed is all very surface level. It's the technologies we do, the activities on a day-to-day level, but the system of business, the way in which insight sits within that framework hasn't changed for many, many years. And however it changes will be incredibly slow. But it remains that golden, untapped opportunity.
Absolutely. Some good thoughts there. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to everyone listening too. We are out of time today, but I'll be back next year with season 6 of the MRX Lab, an exciting lineup of guests. Until then, I'm your host, Mike Connor, and this has been the MRX Lab.
Good luck.